Welcome to our groundbreaking episode, Gallery, the Holy Grail of Cancer Detection, where we dive into a monumental leap in the fight against cancer. Today, we're not just talking about any cancer, specifically those insidious forms that for years have eluded early detection. This is like pancreatic, ovarian, lung, and liver cancers. We're shedding light on a revolutionary new test, Gallery, a beacon of hope with the promise to detect early signals of these formidable and feared cancers. This journey is personal. 25 years ago, I faced a profound loss where my husband, a picture of health and vitality at age 46, was snatched away from us by pancreatic cancer. With no significant health history, no family cancer lineage, he was a prodigy of sorts, a brain researcher, psychiatrist with unparalleled clinical acumen, an opera singer whose voice could touch souls, a sailor who conquered waves, a skier who braved mountains, and above all, a loving husband and a father to our two young children. His loss underscored a harrowing truth that pancreatic and ovarian cancers, among others, are often cloaked in silence until it's too late. When he was going through this treatment, my son asked me, "Mom, why can you make patients better, but not Dad?" And then my daughter chimed in and asked, "Mom, can we ask Pac-Man to eat away my dad's cancer?" Those questions choked me then and still have similar effects now. They didn't know that at the time, I also had questions, but mine were but overshadowed by theirs. The questions that haunted me was simple and yet profound. How can our immune surveillance fail us? What makes this cancer undetected until it's too late? Wouldn't it be miraculous to have some sort of screening test for those at risk to diagnose those cancers early when there are only hundreds of cells rather than millions? Then perhaps our chances for treatment will be better. So fast forward today, here we are, a historic breakthrough, the Holy Grail Gallery test. Today, we're honored to have with us a guest from the pioneering team behind this novel testing technology. Get ready to delve into an enlightening discussion about this potentially game-changing advancement, a discovery that not only offers a glimmer of hope, but stands poised to rewrite the narrative of cancer detection and survival. Join us as we explore a future where the fight against cancer is marked not by despair, but by hope and resilience. Dr. Josh Ofman is the president of GRAIL. Josh serves as chairman of the board of directors of Everyone Medicines, a company dedicated to precision medicine for rare genetic diseases, and serves on the board of the Precision Medicine Coalition. He has previously served as board of directors of Cell BT Incorporated, an immunotherapy company. Previously, Josh spent more than 15 years at Amgen, his last role being Senior Vice President for Global Value Access and Policy. Prior to that, Josh was a faculty in the Department of Medicine and Health Science Services Research at the University of California, Los Angeles School of Medicine, and the Division of Digestive Diseases at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, as well as Senior Vice President of Zinc Health Incorporated, a subsidiary of Cerner Corporation. Josh holds a BA in History and Philosophy of Science from the University of California, Berkeley, and an MD from the University of California, Irvine School of Medicine. Josh completed his medical training at the UCLA School of Medicine Division of Internal Medicine and Digestive Diseases, where he also completed the NRSA Primary Care Research Fellowship in collaboration with the RWJ Clinical Scholars Program. Josh also receives a Master of Science in Health Service Research from UCLA School of Public Health. Welcome, Josh, and thank you for joining us. I'm so excited about Gallery.
Well, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And as you know, for the past decade or so, we have had single cancer screening, like mammogram for breast cancer, pap smear for cervical, PSA for prostate cancer, colonoscopy for colorectal, and low-dose CT for lung cancer. And yet, 70% of cancers diagnosed today do not have early screening and are not detected with this valuable method. So my question to you, Josh, we have now this paradigm shift from a single cancer screening to a multi-cancer early detection screening with a single non-invasive blood test. So tell us about this new technology.
Well, first of all, you framed up the issue brilliantly. Up to today, we've been focusing on looking for cancer, one cancer at a time. And we've really relied on some tools that have been around for decades, imaging tests, directly visualizing tissues, and maybe looking at some proteins in the blood. And in some respects, looking for one cancer at a time is very helpful. Mammography, has saved lives. Colonoscopy has saved lives. They're wonderful tests. The problem is they're not finding enough cancer in the population. And as you said, somewhere between 70 and 80% of all the cancer deaths are coming from cancers we are not looking for at all. And that is an enormous problem. And it's the reason why cancer is soon to become the number one killer of humans worldwide, surpassing cardiovascular disease. And why is that? It's because we're finding most cancers too late. By the time symptoms present, they've often spread. And when cancers have spread, they're very, very difficult to treat. So GRAIL has pioneered this paradigm-changing innovation called the Gallery test, which what we're doing is we're looking in the blood for DNA that is being shed directly from tumors. And we can read that DNA in people's blood. And we're not looking for the standard things that people look for, like mutations or changes in the code of the DNA. We're looking at this pattern of molecules that are attached to the DNA. And when you see that pattern is almost never seen in people who do not have cancer. And when we look at that DNA, we can see two things. Is there a pattern suggestive that this person has cancer? Yes or no? And if so, where in the body is that signal coming from? And we've now learned that this signal, by looking at the DNA in blood, can detect well over 50 different kinds of cancer by a single blood draw. And so that is a completely paradigm-changing idea about, instead of looking for your breast cancer or your prostate cancer, we can now look at an individual rather than an individual cancer and ask, what cancer might that person have? And let's go find it. Because if you can find cancer when it's asymptomatic, we have a great chance of not only curing it, but lots of options to treat it.
Wow, that's wonderful. So, how is that possible with a single blood test? Is this incorporating also AI and looking at billions of cells?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the way our test was developed is we draw someone's blood and we look at the DNA in the blood and we amplify that DNA, and then we sequence the DNA in a certain way to tell us about the epigenetic pattern, or all the molecules that are attached to the DNA. And we've used AI machine learning to train on thousands and thousands of cancers. So what is the pattern that's common that you see in cancer, that you might see the same pattern in a lung cancer or a breast cancer or a pancreatic cancer? And we've learned and trained this machine learning algorithm over about 8 years now. And it's gotten very, very accurate. In fact, if you look at single cancer screening tests, they might have a false positive rate of 10 or 15%. That means 10 or 15% of people without cancer will be told they have cancer. With our assay, we've trained this machine learning algorithm to be so precise that the false positive rate is 0.5%. And that's for any of the cancers that it may detect, which is over 50. So many, many fewer false positives, because we knew that if you were going to have a test that could look for 50 or more cancers, you can't have a 10% false positive rate or a 15% false positive rate. So we made the false positive rate, we set it to be very, very low. And that's a really good thing in terms of safety. So very accurate. It can pick up the deadliest cancers with very high sensitivity in the early stages. It's very specific. In other words, there's a very low false positive rate. And when we predict where in the body that signal is coming from, it's about 90% accurate. So no test like this has ever been seen before. And we've done some enormous studies now to validate the test. And it's been in the market now for over 2.5 years. And we've done over 200,000 tests now in the real world. And we are finding cancer, every week in people who have no idea they have cancer.
I'm so happy that you talked about now, like, let's jump into that and unpack it a little bit for our audience. You talked about sensitivity, specificity, positive predictive value. I know when I was in medicals, I hated those topics because I just can't grasp it. Can you just slightly unpack it and compare it to, for example, a mammogram, right? So what is the sensitivity of mammogram, specificity of it compared to Gallery in some kind of like simple numbers?
Yeah, it's hard to do because the purpose of the tests are very, very different. So when you're looking for a single cancer, okay, in the breast, for example, the tool that they use is imaging. It's called a mammogram. It's an image. You're looking at shadows. So you want to find everything possible that could even resemble a cancer, okay? And so you want very high sensitivity. You want this tool to be very, very sensitive. And mammograms are about 90% or more sensitive. They find, but in being that sensitive, there are a lot of false positives. In other words, the positive predictive value, which means if you have a positive mammogram, what's the likelihood you have breast cancer? That's about somewhere between 5 and 15%, depending on which mammography technique is evaluated. So it's very low. In other words, if you're told you have a positive mammogram, the likelihood that you have cancer is quite low. It's somewhere between 5 and 15%. Okay. Gallery's just the opposite. We're not looking for any particular cancer. We're looking in your blood to see if you have a signal for any cancer. And so when we do that, when we find that signal, we will not be as sensitive as a single cancer screening test, right? We're going to miss cancers because not all cancers are shedding a lot of DNA into the blood. But when we find that signal, the positive predictive value, the likelihood that you have cancer is an order of magnitude higher than for mammography. In other words, our positive predictive value isn't 5 to 15%, it's 40 to 50%. So if you get a positive Gallery test, you have a 1 in 2 chance that you're sitting there right now with cancer. And it's really important to make sure people understand Gallery is not about telling someone they have a risk of developing cancer. It tells them they likely have cancer in their body right now. And that's very different than many of the other genetic tests for cancer.
Yeah, so the genetic testing predicts the future, like if you
Right.
are likely to develop the cancer, whereas Gallery is real time, like
That's right.
right now you have the cancer signal. Now,
Exactly.
this is so interesting since you mentioned about the possibility that it doesn't mean that you have cancer if they said we detected cancer signals, right? So it really is incumbent for the patient to really proceed to connect with the primary care physician and proceed to the diagnostic process. Is
That's
that right?
exactly right. That's why this is a Gallery is a physician prescribed product test.
Mm-hmm.
It's not direct to consumer in any way. We're educating people about the presence of Gallery, but you have to get a prescription. And then if it's positive, it will tell the doctor where in the body to go look. So if it says Gallery, signal detected, cancer signal detected, predicted origin ovary, your doctor ought to know how to go look at the ovary. You either do a pelvic image or you do a transvaginal ultrasound, one of the tests. If it says pancreas, you get an MRI of the abdomen. If it says liver, same thing. If it says stomach, you look in the stomach. So the test tells you where to go look. And most often, if there's a cancer there, it will be where we predict it. There are times where you may not find anything. And then doctors might look again in 3 months and find it then, or they may look somewhere else in the body to find it. We offer a free repeat Gallery test so that if the repeat comes back negative, you can consider that a false positive. And we recommend getting Gallery every year. So you just come back and get Gallery next year. And then
Is
some
that,
doctors will do a whole body image. That's another option people have.
yeah, yeah. So is it really a false positive, or it probably has not been picked up yet, right?
Well,
Um,
we're seeing that. We're seeing both. We're
yeah.
seeing real false positives where a thorough search has been done and there's no cancer found. And then we're seeing what we call the false positive actually show up, 3 or 6 months later, or in another location that the patient actually did have cancer. And so it wasn't actually a false positive. And we're doing some larger studies now that will help us get more precise about how often those two things happen.
Walk me through. Is there more cancer shedding that you picked up from the cell-free DNA samples if the tumor burden is high or is an aggressive cancer? Could you enlighten
Yeah.
me on that one?
Yeah, so it's a fantastic question. So the way our test works is we're not looking at shadows and images, and we're not looking at the tissue through a camera. We're actually looking for a biological signal from the cancer itself. Is that cancer shedding DNA into the blood? We've known and we've published, and it's now well established that cancers that are shedding DNA into the blood are aggressive and invasive cancers. Some of the cancers that people are worried about that we're finding a lot of, prostate cancers, hormone positive breast cancers, that maybe aren't going to kill people, that are not that aggressive, they call them indolent cancers, like these prostate cancers that many men are finding, where the doctors are saying, you're more likely to die with that prostate cancer than from that prostate cancer. Those cancers tend not to shed a lot of DNA into blood. They call that overdiagnosis of cancer. And so Gallery is very unlikely to contribute to that, because we're not going to find those slow growing cancers, because guess what? Slow growing cancers are not shedding a lot of DNA into blood. Hematologic tumors are shedding a lot of DNA into blood. Aggressive, invasive solid cancers like esophageal, pancreas, ovary, uterine, liver, gastric, the really bad aggressive cancers are shedding a lot of DNA into the blood. Now, our test doesn't find brain cancers, right? Because the brain is protected from the blood by the blood-brain barrier, so that you're not going to see DNA being shed into the blood. So that's another issue that you need to be aware of.
Yeah, this is interesting. So historically, how did GRAIL start? I mean, they talked about like the prenatal testing that we do now that would probably replace amniocentesis. Tell us how it started.
Well, it's a fascinating origin story, actually, Gabriella. It started in a company called Illumina, which is a DNA sequencing company. And they were doing a big study in, I think, over 125,000 pregnant women to try to see whether, instead of putting a big needle, amniocentesis into women's bellies and drawing fluid, which is risky for the fetus, they could just look in the mother's blood, because the baby, the fetus, and the mother are exchanging blood all the time through the placenta. So they did this huge study in 125,000 healthy pregnant women. And there were about 10 women in that study whose DNA in the blood looked very abnormal. And within Illumina, there was a chief medical officer who came from the National Cancer Institute. And he said, you only see DNA that looks like that when you have cancer. And they called those 10 women back. And sure enough, all 10 of those healthy women with no symptoms had cancer, different kinds of cancer all over the body. That was published in JAMA in 2015. And that's when the light bulbs went off in Illumina, saying, hey, we may have just landed on a way of finding asymptomatic cancer in healthy adults. So they spun out a company called GRAIL as an independent company. GRAIL raised a lot of money, found a board of directors, and began to pursue this technology with machine learning and genetics combined, and have now developed that assay. And that's where the history began.
Yeah, yeah, that is so fascinating from one to the next, right? So, would this multi-cancer early detection screen replace the USPSTF guidelines on screening, or would that be just to augment it?
Yeah, so we did not develop Gallery to replace mammograms or colonoscopies or pap smears. Those are wonderful tests. They're highly, highly sensitive, and they've been shown to reduce deaths from cancer. So
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
we think Gallery is a complement to those tests because the problem with those tests is they're just not finding enough cancer in the population. So if you add Gallery to that, you can not only improve the whole cancer detection system that we have in the United States by adding Gallery to the 5 recommended screening tests, you can triple the number of cancers you find in the population and reduce the overall number of false positives in the population at the same time. So it becomes a much more efficient screening system and a much more effective screening system by increasing the population cancer detection rate by 3 times.
So there you go. Yeah, so I had a lot of questions. For example, some of my women patients are always concerned about ovarian cancer because, when you get the diagnosis, it's really far advanced. I mean, going back again to the sensitivity of the test and specificity of the test. For example, if I'm thinking about ovarian cancer, what is the sensitivity of this test in diagnosing ovarian from your CCGA studies that you had? So could you kind of like give the audience a glimpse of what that study was
Yeah.
and like how advanced should the ovarian cancer be for detection through this technology?
Right. So you made a point earlier that's really important that aggressive and invasive cancers tend to shed more DNA, and the later stage cancers tend to shed more DNA than the early stage cancers. So what we've learned from our study is that for the most aggressive cancers, let's say the 12 cancers that account for about 2/3 of cancer deaths in this country, which includes ovarian, lung, pancreatic, esophageal, the 12 deadliest cancers, our early stage sensitivity, which is stage 1 and 2, curable cancers, is about close to 70%.
Wow.
For ovarian, it's even better. So, ovarian was 50% for stage 1, 80% for stage 2. And remember, stage 2 are localized cancers that can be treated often with curative intent. And then 88% for stage 3 and 95% for stage 4. But getting that early stage sensitivity above 50% is really remarkable because right now, our ability to find early asymptomatic ovarian cancer is 0.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
I mean, now I have answers to my patients when they ask me, "Hey, doc, could you test me for all the cancers?" And I looked at, even before, I looked at them and say, "We don't have such a thing." We wait for symptoms and we focus based on your symptoms. Otherwise, it
And,
would not be covered by your insurance.
and oftentimes it's too late. Now, our goal is to get this test FDA approved and covered by insurance. But right now, it's out there as a self-pay test. And we hope people will consider it if they're at risk for cancer. And the biggest risk factor for cancer is age.
Now that we're on that, who should I test for? Like you said, age, about 50 years old. Who
Yeah.
else?
So I think that adults at the age of 50 and above are at elevated risk for cancer, for sure. If you're above 50, you have about a 13 times higher risk of having cancer if you're below 50. But there are other factors that age you into that same level of risk. So if you're a 35-year-old smoker and you smoke 20 pack years, or you're a 35-year-old cancer survivor, you're at about the same risk as a 50-year-old. Or if you've been exposed to a lot of toxic chemicals, you may be at that same level of risk. Or if you carry a mutation that puts you at high risk for cancer, like a BRCA mutation, or if you have a strong family history of pancreatic cancer or ovarian cancer and other risk factors, that can age you into that same level of elevated risk. So we recommend Gallery as an annual test for adults at elevated risk for cancer, such as adults over the age of 50 And then there are other risk factors that if you're an obese diabetic and a strong family history, you're certainly at elevated risk for cancer.
Yeah, I'm glad that you talked about obesity, which is now ranking high as a risk factor for
That's right.
cancer, not just cardiovascular, which we thought before was high risk for cardiovascular, but now to cancer as well. So I'm
That's right.
glad that you mentioned about obesity. Now, I know you had studied this technology in many different trials. So could you tell us about the expansive trials that you have done to look at gallery testing?
Yeah. One of the things I'm most proud of about GRAIL is the investments they've made into generating evidence. This is groundbreaking technology. Nothing like this has ever been seen before. The FDA has never reviewed anything like this before. And so we've made the right investments and we're setting the bar very high. We've studied over 385,000 individuals in our trials. We have what I believe is one of the largest human genomics programs ever conducted. We started with our case-controlled study called the Circulating Cell-Free Genome Atlas of about 15,000 individuals, 10,000 who had cancer, 5,000 who didn't. That enabled us to learn and study what is the difference here, and can we use machine learning to train an algorithm that could identify who has cancer and who doesn't. We then followed that with a prospective interventional study in the United States called Pathfinder of 6,600 adults over the age of 50. And Pathfinder showed that when you added Gallery to their standard of care screenings, you more than doubled the number of cancers you could find in the population, and you could do it with a very high positive predictive value, over 40%. We're also doing the largest randomized clinical trial ever conducted in multi-cancer testing in England with the National Health Service there. That's 140,000 adults over the age of 50 randomized to standard of care screening versus standard of care screening plus Gallery. And that's now completed enrollment. They're in their third year now, and it's 3 consecutive years of testing. We're also now doing 2 more large studies, another large US study of 35,000 adults called Pathfinder 2, and a large study called the REACH study in 50,000 Medicare beneficiaries being tested for 3 consecutive years, and Medicare is going to pay for the test. So an enormous program of evidence with a lot of clinical validation, and we're going to submit these large trials to the FDA for consideration.
It's amazing. It's amazing. And I hope people are aware that this is a self-pay test, right?
Yeah.
But people may not be aware that we have a lot of testing out there that cost a lot more money and they're so invasive. This is a single blood test. I mean, the cost of it is really not as much as if I did an autoimmune profile on a person, it costs thousands of dollars. And this is a single test, which costs what, about close to $1,000?
Yeah, it's less. It's about $949 if you walk in off the street or use telemedicine. There are other large systems that get discounted prices on that as well. But that's about the price of it. And again, it's much less than the big whole body imaging exams, much less than all the genetic tests that they use in cancer patients. And so it's good value for money, but we know it's a lot of money still for people. So we have line of sight about how to get that down, but we think the solution to the problem is we need to get FDA approval and we need to get payers to reimburse the test. And that way people won't have to pay out of pocket.
Yeah,
But we
yeah.
also, just on the evidence program, one other thing I wanted to add, we are keeping a very close eye on health equity. And many of our studies are really targeting very diverse populations from underserved communities. The trial we're doing in the United Kingdom is highly diverse with a lot of socioeconomic deprivation in the study. The Pathfinder 2 study in the United States and the Medicare study have a significant focus on ethnic minority groups and underserved communities as well, because a test like this needs to be broadly accessible to everybody. And we know that non-white minorities are at greater risk for cancer mortality. And that's just an unfortunate reality that we see across the United States.
Exactly. I'm glad that you're into looking at addressing health equity in terms of early detection. So we're almost close to our time. What is your message there if medical providers are listening right now? What will be your message to them? Because it took a while before I even learned about this test. So, for the medical providers out there, what is your message?
So, my message is that there is nothing acceptable about the status quo today in cancer screening. You're doing a great job screening for the 5 recommended cancers, but most of the cancer deaths, that's not where it's happening. It's happening over here where we're not looking. We have technology today that's well validated that can find these other unscreened cancers in asymptomatic adults. And if we can find them early before they've spread, you have a great chance of effective therapy and potentially curing them of their cancer. And we have technology today that can do that. It's miraculous, actually. And I'd like you to see if your patients are interested in taking a test like that, to be very proactive about their health and to look for the deadly cancers that, if we can find them early, we can change the trajectory of their lives.
And they'll just go to your website, GRAIL.
Well, they can speak to their doctors about prescribing it to them, and it's a very simple blood test. Or you can go onto the gallery.com website and order it through a telemedicine provider who, if you meet their criteria, will prescribe Gallery for you. And then you'll receive a kit, a small kit with 2 blood tubes in the mail, and you can go to your doctor or any Quest labs to get it drawn and shipped to GRAIL, and you'll get your result in about 7 to 10 business days.
Or they could even draw it at the privacy of your home, right? So,
Yeah, or someone can come to your home and draw your blood. Exactly.
yeah. And message to our audience?
Just, it's to try to do everything you can to be proactive about your health, as I'm sure you are. I think, cancer is one of those silent killers. It's a devastating fact of life. When someone has cancer, their families get turned upside down. And oftentimes it's because we find those cancers too late. And therapies are just not that effective when you have metastatic cancer. They're getting better every day. But the best chance you have to beat cancer is to find it before it's spread. And we have a tool now that can enable you to do that. It's not perfect, but again, our ability to find asymptomatic, aggressive cancers today for the unscreened cancers is effectively 0, unless you happen to be very lucky and find it incidentally on some other exam. So now we have a tool that can enable you to do that. It's simple. We think it's good value for money, but we know it's not affordable for many yet, which is why we're pursuing FDA approval and broad reimbursement. So we think you should consider it, and we hope you will.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Ofman, for sharing your insights. Our upcoming episode will be on a related topic. It's on personalized cancer treatment, where we could potentially check your own cancer cells against a treatment modality, like
Right.
what we check we test antibiotics against different bacteria. Why can't we check your cancer cells against a certain chemotherapy? So for listeners, please subscribe, leave your reviews, and share the episodes. Thank you, Dr. Ofman.
Thank you. And to your listeners out there, talk to your doctors about whether this test is appropriate for you. I think that's the best thing you can do. And good luck with everything. And thank you so much, Dr. Gabiola, for all of this.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. I appreciate you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.